Asians, right, on average, make more money, in terms of medium, make more money, better test scores, get into better colleges, all that stuff. We need to observe what makes people successful and unsuccessful. And I think when you look at trends that are generally true in the Asian community, not of everyone, but are generally true, usually you have families that are sticking together, you have, people are taught to work hard in school, not get into trouble. I think that translates to why Asians en masse are successful. And I don't think you have to be Asian or white for that matter to not have kids out of wedlock, not, commit crime, not cause trouble, or whatever it is.
This guy's name is Vince Dow, and you might be thinking he's right, but he's actually wrong. Let me tell you why. First of all, my name is Austin Mo, and this will be my final project for ethnic studies. Now, before we get into the topic of the video, I would like to explain about why I chose this topic to be part of our video. And I felt that this topic needs to be more spoken out about as it's pretty much deeply ingrained into the stereotype. People like Vince Dow are pushing the stereotype that Asian Americans are bound to be naturally hardworking, smart, and successful. But we cannot automatically assume that just because you're Asian doesn't mean that you'll be automatically fulfilling these traits. That is simply a myth, also known as the model minority myth, which will be the topic that we begin into in this video. Now, speaking of statistics, is there actually a lot of Asian Americans that are smart, hardworking, and successful? Yes, but there's a reason why. And to start off, in 1965, Congress passed a bill also known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, where the US removed racist quotas and prioritized Asian immigrants with high education or technical skills. This meant that doctors, engineers, professors, and scientists from other Asian countries were able to immigrate, unlike the farm workers and people in poverty. And contrary to the myth, majority of the immigrants that were successful and educated were mainly from Asia, as many Latin Americans and other countries came as refugees of labor without access to the same education and financial tools. Hence why we have the model minority myth. Since then, the myth has emerged in the late 1950s and 60s to contrast the black-led civil rights activism that often depicted Asian Americans as quiet, hardworking, and obedient minorities who would often succeed without protesting. However, this is not true, as Asians also held an Asian American movement and protested against the racism and injustice that the government has imposed on them. During the late 1960s and 70s, the Asian American movement emerged as students, workers, and organizers stood up to challenge this model minority myth and fought for real change. Notable figures like Yuri Gochiami joined black, brown activists in the fight for racial justice, standing beside Malcolm X. Grace Lee Bogg also spent decades organizing in Detroit for civil rights, labor rights, and revolutionary change rooted in community power. And contrary to how this correlates with ethnic studies, the emergence of the Asian American movement directly challenged the model minority myth, how its struggles can be recognized in education. At San Francisco State University in 1968, Asian American students, alongside Black, Latinx, and Native American peers, formed the Third World Liberation Front to protest the lack of representation in the curriculum. The strike, which became the longest student-led protest in U.S. history, called for courses that reflected the live experiences of communities of color. This united movement led to the creation of the nation's first School of Ethnic Studies, marking a foundational moment where Asian Americans and other marginalized groups fought for visibility, identity, and educational justice. So the model minority myth essentially is deeply relevant to the ethnic studies because it reveals how racial stereotypes are constructed, weaponized, and used to uphold systems of inequality. Like as seen in the civil rights movement, it was also used in the Cold War. It was kind of used as an explanation of how Asian Americans were striving and prospering under capitalism rather than communism in comparison to their home countries, which is technically still a very false portrayal and essentially falsely portrays our Asian Americans as universally successful, masking the real struggles of many of these subgroups and just erasing histories of their discrimination, exclusion, and the activism that we have here in the United States. And politically, it silences the demands of real justice to divide communities of color, and by examining this myth through the ethnic studies, we can kind of better understand how this racism not just operates through exclusion and directly segregating our people, but also through these positive stereotypes that still kind of serve the white supremacy and the systemic oppression that we have. So now that we know what model minority is, we're able to stand up and speak out about this stereotype and kind of prove it wrong, as it is what is pretty much ingrained into the society and the identity of the Asian community. And this topic is something that we can't simply stay quiet on, because even though it's a topic that's kind of seen to be harmless, it's still untrue, and it's something that we have to call out on. based on these unrealistic expectations, the pressure to perform, and it's something that we have to consider for our other ethnic communities as well. And success, hard work, and being smart in general is something that we are all capable of, regardless of our race and our origin. And with that being said, I hope you understand more about what model minority myth is and how we can counter it. Thank you for your time.